Hi everyone, welcome to today's video. My name's Stephanie and today I'm going to be showing you Cracked Polish's new Gloom and Doom collection. Now I know the name might sound a little ominous, but it's actually inspired by flowers blooming in the rainy days of the Pacific Northwest. So it's kind of like a darker spring collection, which I think is so cool, so different than what we normally see. As always, I will save more of my thoughts for the end. For now, let's just get into the swatches. The first shade in the collection is Apricot Whisper, and this one is described as a sheer peach with pink shimmers. This is one of two polishes in the collection that actually has shimmers and the rest are creams, and I would say that this shimmer is a lot more apparent on the nail than the other shade, maybe because there's more contrast between the shimmer color and the base, which as I mentioned is a sheer peachy shade, so as you can see it definitely is really sheer. You just get a subtle wash of that peachy color on the first coat, but it does build up really beautifully on two coats. It just still is going to be very sheer, so there is a lot of nail line. If you don't like that, of course you can use a blurring base coat. I do prefer this one on 3 coats though, just because the apricot color really comes through a lot more. It's almost a little bit muted, which I think gives a really nice contrast to that bright glowy pink shimmer. I could see this one being a little bit pearlescent, so you might want to be careful with your application. Next up we have Lion's Tooth, and this is a warm vanilla cream, and I really enjoyed this one. I just love these kind of ivory off-white shades so much, and this one had such a beautiful formula. For being such a light color, it gave me really great coverage where it was really just a little bit streaky on the left side of my nail. For the most part, it was pretty covered up on 2 coats, but because those streaks were pretty bad, I think I did need a 3rd coat for this one. But depending on your application and your nail length, I could see this one being a 2-coater for some people. And even though it's described as a warm vanilla kind of color, I feel like it's not too warm that it kind of has that yellow tinge to it. It really just feels like a very bright off-white kind of shade that just feels so elegant. The next cream we have is called Stem, and this is described as a leafy green. I can see this also being called a grass green, or maybe more accurately a Kelly green, which to be honest aren't typically my favorite shades of green, but I can definitely see them having a place. The formula on this one, as I'm sure you can tell, is a lot more on the crelly side, so even though it was very pigmented and very full coverage for the most part, there still was a level of squishiness where you just see through to my nail line, but it did get perfectly opaque in just 2 coats. The other shimmer in the collection is called Purple Beard Tongue, and this one is a dark magenta with gold shimmer, which I was honestly kind of surprised to see that the shimmer was gold. I just thought it was pink, very similar to Apricot Whisper, which is why I had mentioned before that I felt that the shimmer in this one was a lot more subtle because it just sort of blends in with the base color. The base color is beautiful though. It just has this really vibrant purpley lilac kind of color to it, but I think the main reason the shimmer kind of gets lost in the base is also because of how opaque it is. I'm sure you could tell from the first coat alone, it was just very pigmented and it pretty much was fully opaque in 2 coats. The next shade we have is Rocky Mountain Iris, and this one is just described as a gray purple, which definitely is accurate. It's just funny because when I first saw this shade, I would think to call it a periwinkle, but you'll see why it's not exactly a periwinkle once we do comparisons. If anything, it's a very, very muted, dusty kind of periwinkle that I think is just so beautiful. This one did have a slightly crelly-ish formula too, but again, it was perfectly opaque in 2 coats. All of the formulas are smooth and self-level beautifully, but this was easily my favorite. And rounding out the collection, we have Drizzle, and this one is just described as a midnight blue. So I thought that this was going to be another favorite from this collection, but I didn't end up loving it as much as I thought that I would. The formula isn't bad, but it just is more on the crelly side, kind of similar to Stem, and that just isn't my preference when it comes to cream formulas. I just prefer them to be more fully opaque and creamy, mainly because you can also use them in nail art a lot easier. But just like the other shades, this one built up to be fully opaque in 2 coats, and it ended up being a pretty bright but dark blue at the same time. And here is the collection minus stem, worn as a skittle. I'm wearing 2 coats of each, and you can see they are all pretty much full coverage. Even the shimmer on my thumb. The only one that has a little bit of nail line is Apricot Whisper, because that one has the sheerest base. Maybe you could see a little bit on Lion's Tooth, which is on my middle finger, but I don't think it's that bad. Now, getting into comparisons, I really didn't have anything quite like Apricot Whisper. I feel like the closest was Cirque's Amour Propre from their Good Vibrations collection, but as you can see, that one's darker and also warmer. Then for Lion's Tooth, I wanted to show it next to Morgan Taylor's Wrapped Around Your Finger, which came out this past winter. I wore it recently as the base for a floral mani and just knew I had to see these next to each other. And I also wanted to see it next to OPI's My Vampire's Buff, which is, I feel like, a cult classic. I actually don't even know if they make this shade anymore, but it's just another one of those warm, creamy shades. That one leans a little bit more on the peach side, and I would say Morgan Taylor is a little bit more of a true vanilla cream. You can see how much more neutral Lion's Tooth is, where it almost looks white, so I did want to show this next to Olive F Snowy, which is a pure white cream, just for some comparison, so you can see how off-white Lion's Tooth actually is. I really felt like I had something similar, and then I remembered Orly's Ceci n'est pas Blanc from their Surrealism collection a few years ago, and these two are definitely the closest to being dupes that I have in my collection. The difference is minimal. I would say that Orly's is a little bit dustier maybe, so I like how bright Cracked Polishes is for spring. Then for stem, I knew I had to see this next to Cirque's Renegade, which is another bright Kelly green cream, but you can see right away in the bottle that one is just so much brighter. So I thought for a slightly dustier option, I can maybe compare this to Holo Taco's Modest Moss from last year's fall bundle. It is different color wise, but I just thought maybe the dustiness would kind of match, and it sort of does in a way. Like, I would say that stem has a little bit of a muted quality to it, but color wise it's a little bit closer to Renegade, if that makes sense. Either way, they're not dupes. Next for Purple Beard Tongue, I thought it might be kind of similar to Olive Ave's Rhododendron from the very first spring collection. It's one of those lilac-y sort of shades, but as you can see, it's a little too light and pink leaning. So I thought for something darker, maybe Holo Taco's Feelin Fiendish would be kind of similar. I feel like they look closer here in the bottle, but once you see them on the nail, they are nothing alike. Not to mention that Purple Beard Tongue has shimmer in it, but yeah, these are definitely not dupes. Then for Rocky Mountain Iris, I had to show this next to a couple of true periwinkle shades like Holo Taco's Peri-social, which you might be able to see is a lot brighter. So I thought for a slightly kind of dustier option, Olive Ave's Lilac would be good, because that's another shade I would consider a true periwinkle. And they definitely can look kind of similar here in the bottle, but seeing them on the nail, the difference is so wild. You really see so much of that gray undertone in Rocky Mountain Iris. And then I remembered about Olive Ave's Artie, which was from last year's spring collection. That one is obviously more of a red-leaning purple as opposed to a blue-leaning one. But aside from that, I feel like they both have that same level of grayness to them. They're just slightly different colors, so I would love to know which one you prefer, the warmer or cooler one. And finally for Drizzle, I have a couple of dark blue comparisons. The first one that I thought of was KBShimmer's Stream On, Stream Away, but as you can see, that one is way too dark. So I thought maybe Olive Ave's Signature from the past winter collection would be a little closer, and I feel like they look close here in the clip, but Signature is actually a little bit more teal leaning, so these aren't really close at all. Another Olive Ave blue that I actually thought was closer was Teddy, which sadly isn't around anymore. And I know this one is picking up even brighter and more cobalt on camera, but in real life they look a lot closer. Blues can just be very tricky to capture sometimes. And the last blue cream that I have to compare it to is Mooncat's Into the Abyss. But as I'm sure you're able to tell, that one is a lot darker and it looks almost black on the nail. It's like a really, really deep navy. So Teddy is a little bit closer, but still too dark to match the color that Drizzle is. So I thought maybe I can show it next to Color Department's Dark and Stormy, which I thought looked pretty close in the bottle. Like maybe the color was a little off, but the level of mutedness versus brightness was about the same. And another dusty blue that I have is Zoya's Brett, but as you can see, that one's a lot more gray leaning, a lot dustier. And Dark and Stormy ended up being too dark still, so I ended up not having anything like Drizzle in my collection. So that wraps up my swatches and comparisons of Cracked Polish's Gloom and Doom collection. As always, I would love to know your thoughts on this release, especially having that slightly darker spring kind of vibe, because I think it's such a unique take to take normal like spring bright flowers blooming, but just having this darker, moodier vibe to them. If you know me, you know that I don't usually love those moody kind of gloomy days, but I do love a good polish or collection that really just makes me appreciate them, and I feel like that's what this collection does. Overall, I thought the colors were so beautiful and almost brighter than I was kind of expecting them to be. I don't know if it's just the name or if they do actually dry brighter than they are in the bottle, but I half expected these shades to have this like dark, moody, muted kind of look that almost would make them like fall colors, but they definitely are not that. I definitely don't think they have that same dusty mutedness that you see in fall shades. But overall, I thought the formulas were great too. I didn't end up loving these as much as I loved the makeup collection formulas. For some reason, those pastels just felt like they were more creamy, whereas these had a slightly more crelly kind of feel, which I think you could tell from that first coat and being a little bit on the thin side. But they did all pretty much build up to be fully opaque in just 2 coats, which I definitely do prefer when it comes to creams, so I have no complaints there. I almost forgot to mention this, but these are actually going to launch next Friday, May 24th. As a reminder, I am an affiliate with Cracked Polish, so if you were planning on picking these shades up, you could support me and my channel by shopping through my affiliate link in the description box down below. You also have a code that's Yogi10, but it is one-time use, so if you do use it or my link, big thank you for the support. But either way, I would love to know any and all thoughts that you have down below so we can chat about it. But thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!